Kanda. Demonos. Kanda. You know, this book has no real plot structure. It would help if I knew Sumerian, I guess. Hello, YouTube! So today we will be looking at The Evil Dead, the ultimate experience in grueling terror. But before we actually go into it, let's go a bit into the very in-depth history. And by that I mean let's skip over a lot of the really fun facts about it, because there was a lot of interesting stuff that happened on set, and let's be honest, we don't have enough time to get into that. So, enjoy a minute-long recap of that. I skipped over a lot. The story starts in high school, where Bruce Campbell, Scott Spiegel, and Sam Raimi were making Super 8 films. Upon meeting, they decided to work on them together, with Bruce being the lead most of the time because, and I quote, he was the good-looking one. And hey, I can't argue with that. It's all about the chin. After a while, they decided to make a feature film. That film being Book of the Dead, later renamed The Evil Dead. In order to get funding, they put Sam's experience as a door-to-door salesman to use by showing the short they had made called Within the Woods to potential buyers. Once they got just enough funding, they got to work. The process was miserable, with many of the cast and crew getting hurt, exhausted, or working 24/7. Once filming wrapped, the editing process started and lasted for a few years. They also got some guy named Joel Cohen to be an assistant editor, but I don't think they went anywhere after that. The film was finally released April 24th, 1983. Its big claim to fame was Stephen King giving it a great review, and has since gone on to inspire many other horror films, get video games, sequels, / a remake, kinda, we'll get to that, a TV show, and comics. So while this film might be extremely iconic, and might even create its own subgenre, does it still hold up? Or better yet, does it still deserve the tagline, the ultimate experience in grueling terror? Well, let's get into it and find out. Also, yes, no vestie for this one, because while I really love my vest, it's honestly really annoying with this shirt. I don't know why, but it is, and I could not pass up on wearing my ass shirt. So, yes, vestie will just be making cameos, and yes, I named my vest. Let's get into this and move on from how lame I am. So the story is actually pretty simple. 5 friends go to a cabin in the woods for the weekend to, well, party. Said party consisting of one of them drawing, the others splitting up into their own rooms to do their own thing, and coming together to eat dinner. Truly the most exciting party that has ever happened, although to be fair, I don't go to many parties, and they might have had a bit more planned before this whole Evil Dead thing ended up happening, so we'll never know the true excitement that they were going to get up to. So anyway, while they're eating dinner, the cellar door swings open, so 2 of them, Ash and Scott, go down to investigate. While down there, they find some really suspicious stuff, like a Ripped Hills Have Eyes poster. Oh, and also like a Kandarian dagger, a Necronomicon, and a tape recorder that has on it a transcribed version of a lot of the passages on it, because when you find a book clad in human flesh and inked in blood, the best thing to do is to read it out loud. I'm sure it'll be fine. So yeah, they bring up all the stuff that they found, and they decide to listen to the tape recorder. They listen to the nicest sounding passage out of all of them, the Demon Resurrection one. To be fair, I would probably listen to that too if I were in their scenario, just out of sheer curiosity. So yeah, believe it or not, the Demon Resurrection passage resurrects demons. I'll wait for your shock to subside there. So yeah, demons are now resurrected, and they start possessing or killing off members of the group one by one. And starting with Cheryl, then going on to Shelly, Linda, Scotty, and Ash is the only one left alive. Or at the very least, he was, unless if you view this as a self-contained experience, in which case he freaking dies at the end. But if you want to view this as a series, then, well, yeah, he just narrowly escapes death. So, yeah, it really just depends on how you want to view this ending, but still, it's very bleak. So, yeah, all of his friends are dead. Yay! Like I said, it's bleak. So for the story, like I said, it's very simple. It's pretty much become the building blocks for these sort of cabin in the wood-esque movies, and there's a good reason for that. While it might be very basic, its execution is very good. It knows how to handle this in a way that, well, kind of tries to deliver on its tagline, the ultimate experience in grueling terror. Yeah, I've already said it. But does it deliver on that? Okay, so the atmosphere is actually really eerie. There's a lot of suspense from just the evil being completely omnipresent throughout the whole thing, and there are just little tiny details that really go a long way, like just the way that it's sort of framed from these characters sort of being seen as observed as just sort of like little playthings to these things, and just the way the Deadites really treat them. And the Deadites are probably the best example for the horror in this movie. They are completely unrelenting, and just like the horror, they don't give up. Once the ball gets rolling with them, it doesn't stop, and that's exactly the pace of this film. Once that tape recorder is read from, there is no going back. Yeah, it's all tree rape and evil camera fun from there. This movie's really bleak now that I look back on it. Seriously. That tree rape scene is really intense, actually, and there are a lot of scenes like that in this. Like I said, the film was shot on a very low budget, but it makes the most of that. Probably the best part of the grueling thing in that tagline is the pain, and you feel every bit of it. Every cut, every stab into the ankle with a pencil, which is seriously the most intense scene in the movie to me, just because of the way it looks. Every single shell falling on the actors, anything, it really does look painful because, well, most likely it was. There's a lot of realism in this film, almost making it feel like a bit of a snuff film at times, and I really love the way that's portrayed. It adds this sort of eeriness to the whole thing, where all the actors getting hurt could have actually been getting hurt on set, and some of their fights for survival are actually real. So I really love the way that's handled, and it really does work for this movie. It adds a very sort of eerie feel to the whole thing, and I love the way that's executed. But there's also the other thing that sort of made this movie a bit iconic, the camp factor, which, oh my god. So yes, this film is very bleak, and it has some great atmospheric moments, and it's got some very dark scenes. But it's also still a very fun movie to watch that can also get some laughs out of you. Now, this is most likely unintentional, as this one's the most horror out of the series until the remake, but like I said before, we'll get to that. So, yeah, this one is the most horror-based, but yeah, some stuff in this didn't really come out like that. Like, the acting isn't the best, which just sort of adds to it, although I would argue that there are actually some really good moments of acting in here, and I think that all of them get a chance to shine that where acting's concerned. It's just that, yeah, there are some pretty bad line reads, even from some legends like Bruce Campbell. There's some bad ones in here, but also just from some lines in general. Like, there are just some really silly moments in this too, like from the Deadites even. Despite the Deadites being completely evil in this one and not really trying to go for humor, they still got some pretty awesome lines in here, and yeah, I do still find some of them to be pretty fun. That said, there are some still legitimately good creepy moments in here. Like, one thing that I really loved, and this was a very minor detail, I noticed it on my first watch of it. Well, pretty much when Ash is dragging Scotty in because he tried to escape the cabin, while he's doing that, Linda just appears in the doorway behind him. I love little things like that. There's no attention drawn to it, and I had to rewind to see if she was even there before, and she wasn't. I love little things like that. There's stuff like that, and the moon constantly being blotted out, sort of showing that there's darkness surrounding them everywhere. Even in natural areas of light, it's still being corrupted, and I really love stuff like that. So, while there are some great little details, and I love the way the horror and suspense is built up in this, there's also some pretty silly and fun stuff to it, which I really enjoy as well. So for the story, it's got some good scares, a good atmosphere, and can be pretty campy when it wants to be. That said, though, it's got a very simple story that, yeah, there's sort of a reason why it's sort of become the base plate for a lot of these Cabin in the Woods movies, because, well, it's pretty much just sort of a template. Where it goes from there, though, really is what makes it shine. It drenches itself in mood, and it does its best to deliver, well, a grueling experience. Because, while I wouldn't say this is the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen, I mean, it's probably up there on my ranking of horror movies, probably my top 20. That's not necessarily just because it's scary, but I will say that it is very grueling, because the whole entire thing, it focuses on just the sheer pain and the hopelessness of the situation, and it does so in a way that is really superb. So, yeah, while it might have a very simple story, its execution more than makes up for that. So, for the story, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 because, yeah, there are some pretty hokey parts to it, and I can't really fault that entirely on everyone in it, because, I mean, they were kind of amateur actors at the time, and, you know, I mean, they aren't the best, but still, they did a pretty good job, and I really did enjoy what they brought to it, but, yeah, their acting can be very silly. I think that some of the corny moments in this do kind of ruin some of the fearful moments in it, but still, the execution is still great, and I really love the way that it's handled. But you can't have a good film without some good characters, so yeah, let's get into them. So for the characters, let's start off with the most important one of all, Shelly. Yeah, okay, so Shelly is, not really that interesting. For some odd reason, in a lot of interpretations of this story, like the remake and the musical, she's seen as more of a slutty character, and I don't really know why exactly. She's not overly sexualized in this movie. In fact, there's probably more nudity where Cheryl's concerned. Sure, it's in a way worse situation, but still, I mean, Shelly does have like one scene where, like, you know, she's naked, but even at that, it's just because she's changing and she's not even completely naked. So, like, I really don't know where this came from, but I guess it was just people trying to assume some character for her, because, yeah, she's not overly interesting in this. She is just sort of there, and she kind of gets a bit hysterical at some point, but that's kind of it. Outside of that, there's not really much to her outside of a pretty cool death, which, seriously, I love her death. Like, with the blood getting everywhere, even on the camera, oh, I love that. Great death. I love that. But, yeah, she's just not really interesting, despite being the first Deadite that they actually kill. And they go all out with the full body dismemberment stuff. But still, she just isn't that interesting of a character to me. And then there's one who has her beats for least interesting, Linda. Okay, so Linda is nice, I guess. That's kind of all there is to her. She's just nice. Like, there are a few points in the movie where she shows concern over the other characters, like she wants to check in on Cheryl because she was a bit hysterical earlier. That's kind of it. I mean, she's also a love interest, but she is probably the most generic love interest ever. Seriously, that is her main defining trait. She's nice, which is so descriptive, and she's the love interest. That's kind of all. I will give her this. She can be a pretty creepy deadite when she's just sitting there laughing and eerily smiling. Like, she even looks like a freaking clown a little bit. It's kind of silly there, actually. I kind of find her to be the weirdest looking one, but I also find her to be one of the most unique. So I don't hate her or anything, it's just that she's pretty bland. I think that's some other interpretations later on down the line, like particularly in Evil Dead 2. I mean, I know it's just 5 minutes that she's in that one, but still, we get to see a little bit more to her. Like, we get to see that she has an interest in ballet, stuff like that. So, yeah, I just didn't really find her really interesting in this, and there was nothing that really stood out before she dies. Although that ankle scene, man, that looks painful. Seriously, I still love that scene. Then there's Scotty. I really like Scotty. A lot of people see him as an a-hole, and to be fair, he kind of is, but I don't know. I think that's just a part of his character progression. He starts off sort of making fun of Cheryl the most, but also pulling pranks on the others. He just sort of seems like a bit of a prankster type of character, but as the film goes on, he actually steps up to the plate a little bit more. Yes, surprisingly, a bit more than Ash, as he's actually the first one to kill his own girlfriend, and he does not hold back. He chops her into pieces. It's really intense, but you can still tell that he's just trying to gain some type of control over the situation. After that, though, he rightfully wants to leave, which, you know, makes a lot of sense. He just cut up his girlfriend. And that's where a lot of the conflict with him comes in because, well, he's sort of leaving, but the reason why is because he doesn't really care what happens to Ash or Linda, because Ash is trying to stay behind because, well, Linda's ankle is hurt and she can't walk, whereas Scott just doesn't really care and just wants to get out of there. It makes sense, but it's still pretty cold, and that's kind of where he seems to just sort of depart from the picture, as at that point, yeah, he just gets attacked by trees. He says that there's something out there and that there might be a path that he noticed, and that's kind of it until he dies. But he's probably the least interesting deadite. He just sort of is there, like, he just pops up, and that's kind of it. And he doesn't even really say anything when he's a deadite. It's kind of boring, honestly. Compared to all the other deadites who at the very least have some memorable lines, his is popping up, I guess. It's not, he's just not the most interesting deadite, and I think that he's probably the least interesting out of the whole series. And that's saying a lot, given that in the third movie there's a whole army of deadites, so a lot of them can just blend into the background, but his deadite is a little bit less interesting than those. So yeah, that's saying a lot there, but still, I don't mind Scott. I think that he's actually a pretty interesting character, and I did like how he sort of seemed to be a bit more of a main character type for a lot of the film, actually. It's only until the last half hour where Ash actually steps up to the plate. In fact, he spends most of the movie just sort of sitting on the sidelines, just clinging to an axe. And you can tell that he kind of wants to get involved and help, but he doesn't really want to because, well, they're his friends. And it makes sense, but Scott actually did step up to the plate, and I really liked that about him. I feel like that he just sort of gets harped on a lot, and I don't feel like that's right. I think that he's a pretty decent character, and I think that he deserves to be acknowledged a little bit more for that. And then we got Cheryl. She's Ash's sister, and yeah, she also seemed to be a bit of a main character. Yeah, it's kind of weird. This movie kind of switches between main characters a lot until ultimately settling on Ash, but Cheryl's kind of the first one, as a lot of the evil stuff that's going on seems to be particularly targeted at her. I don't know why exactly. Unless if we're going to go about this in a Lovecraftian scenario, which to be fair, I mean, it does have a Necronomicon wherein artists tend to be targeted by evil forces from the outer gods and stuff, but even at that, it's a bit of a vague connection. It just sort of seems like the evil's just out to get her in specific, like they were just waiting for Cheryl to arrive. But yeah, we do actually get a little bit more to Cheryl than the others, or at the very least than the other female characters out of the group. Now, Cheryl is, well, for one, she's an artist, and I will say she actually is pretty good. That was a really good drawing of that clock. But, yeah, she is also, but she's also a very strong, determined character, as even immediately after being raped, she completely sticks to her guns about leaving. And it's only when her spirit is ultimately broken that she fully gets possessed. And that's when, well, we switch from characters. And I really do like that. I like how they sort of frame the first kill as, well, the main character for a while. It really plays with your expectations there, and I like the way that was handled, but I also like Cheryl's character overall, and there is a reason why she's kind of the most well-known Deadite from this movie. I mean, there are plenty of other Deadites that are more famous, you could argue anyway, like, I mean, Henrietta's a pretty famous one, the Pit Witch, stuff like that, but I don't know, I think that Cheryl's still one of the best out there. She was the first Deadite that we ever got to see on screen, and she's pretty much the most iconic. She's even reappeared in the TV series. They even got her actress back and everything. There's a reason for that, because she's one of the most popular ones there is, and there's a good reason. Also, I feel very bad for the actress during the tree rape scene, because, what was her script? Pretty much just said, the trees attack Cheryl. That is all. So yeah, she was a very good sport where this movie is considered. And then there's Ash. Or Ashley J. Williams, if we're going by what Cheryl likes to call him in this movie. Seriously, I kept on imagining just in his head, he's like, Cheryl, just stop calling me Ashley. I want to be called Ash. It's way cooler. But, yeah, he's very different in this movie than he is in pretty much any other interpretation. Now, you could say that he's very similar to the one Evil Dead 2, but I would argue not overly. I mean, to be fair, they are at the beginning very similar, but about halfway through, like when he lops off his hand in the second one, they're very different personality-wise. Ash in this movie is more of an everyman, and that's kind of what he is throughout most of it. Like I said, it's only until the last half hour where he is forced to step up to the plate because, well, everyone else is dead, so he can't really do anything outside of that. He is mostly concerned with surviving and trying to get out with all of his friends, but ultimately he succumbs to the notion that, yeah, that's gonna be impossible if he actually wants to survive. It's a pretty harsh realization, and when it comes to it, yeah, he still is in conflict. Like, he wants to shoot Linda because, well, you know, she's gonna freaking kill him. He knows this at this point, but still, he can't help but look at her while also seeing the person that he loved. And I think that's really what sort of makes Ash a really interesting character. In this movie, he's just supposed to be a self-insert. What would you do in this situation? Would you really fight back, or would you just sit on the sidelines and just pray for it all to be over? I mean, that's probably what I would do. I mean, I would like to think that I'd be like Scotty and sort of stick up for myself and sort of try and find alternatives, but most likely I would be Ash in that scenario, and yeah, I love the way they sort of play with that. He is forced into being the protagonist just simply because there's no one else left, and I love the way that's handled. However, it's very different from any other interpretation. In the other ones, he, well, has a much more badass sort of character, and he gets some awesome one-liners in there and stuff like that, but that's not really who he was in the first one, and I'll get into more of his character growth once we get, well, into, like, the second and third movie, primarily the third one, but still, right here is when he's at his most vulnerable, and I really love the way that's handled. Even when he loses his hand, he's still a little bit more stronger personality-wise than he is in this one, and it's things like that that really make sort of his story throughout this series really great, because he goes from being an everyman in order to becoming, well, a hero who was forced into the scenario and doesn't really care about anybody. And the progression from that is really good, and I love the way that's handled throughout the course of the films. So, for the characters, I'm half convinced to give them a 9, but 8, because while there are some really good and iconic characters in here, and all of them really get some pretty cool moments, there are still some that are really, really lame, like Linda and Shelley, that are just sort of there. But the other 3 are actually pretty developed, and I do like seeing that. It sort of does balance it out with them, but still, I would have liked for the other 2 to have gotten a little bit more attention. But whereas the other ones are concerned, primarily Ash, there's some very good development even over the course of the rest of the films, and I like seeing how these events sort of never really leave any of these characters. And yes, Ash is the only one who's able to have these events not leave him, but you're still able to tell sort of the strain that it gets on all of them, and I really love the way that sort of stuff is handled. It's part of what adds on to the really sort of building up horror that this movie has. So, for this movie overall, I really, really enjoy it. In fact, I love this movie. I think the reason why can probably be summed up with, well, the first time that I ever watched it. I found it on YouTube because, yes, at one point it was on YouTube, and I was really scared to watch it. I had just gotten into horror, and I'd only seen a few horror movies before this. I mean, to be fair, I had watched things like The Shining. That's even my first horror movie, or at the very least my first official one in my eyes, but still, I don't know. I watched an edited version of that, and all I knew about The Evil Dead was it's an iconic horror series, and it's called The Evil Dead. So I went in really nervous about this, and it wasn't helped by the fact that I decided to watch it at midnight because I'm smart. Okay, well, it wasn't because of that. It's because I put it off for the rest of the day, and it was just until midnight that I forced myself to watch it. So I was watching it in the dark, alone, at midnight. I was a genius. And I really loved what I watched. It scared me sometimes, but overall, I had a blast watching it, and it was really fun. I wanted to check out the next ones immediately, which I did, and I enjoyed them all just as much. But the first one was the only one that was genuinely scary to me at any point. I mean, sure, the remake can be kind of scary, but I feel like that one sort of goes more for body horror, whereas this one just sort of tries to play off of primitive fears that, well, a lot of people have. Stuff like the dark, the inevitability of death, or even succumbing to madness. The movie plays off of those expertly, and I really love the way that's handled. There's some great cinematography in this, too. Like, I really do love the shots in this movie. They are great, and is a very good reason as and it's a very good example as to why Sam Raimi is such a big name in the directing field now, because there are some great atmospheric shots in this, particularly when they first open up the cabin. I love the shot of just Scott sort of creeping the door open with the fog, or just the dust in the room coming together in a beam of light. I love stuff like that, and it just adds so much to the atmosphere. But it's also still a very fun and pretty campy movie from some not overly perfect acting and a very simple plot that does the most with what it can, and I love the way that's handled. So, yeah, for this movie overall, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, as yes, it does have some problems, and it's probably not my favorite out of the series. Actually, it's the second. I'll get to my favorite once we get there. But it's still a really good film, and I really enjoy it. So, and I think that if you're a horror fan that hasn't seen it, what are you waiting on? Seriously, this is one of the most iconic ones out of this. This is one of the most iconic horror series ever. Go check it out, and there's a good reason for that. So, at the very least, give it a chance, and I think that's a really good movie that still holds up to this day. I mean, sure, some stuff is dated, but overall, I think that's just a really great film that just does the best with what it can. Add on to that a very interesting history that knowing it adds a whole lot to it. So that's pretty much it for this one, and next time we will be looking at Evil Dead 2. Oh, shit.